just gonna put my foot on the floor and I'm not lifting till I see God or a checkered flag.
Hello, welcome back to Racing Thoughts and IndyCar Podcast. I'm Megan Dennis,
And I'm Meg Taylor.
and it's been longer than a minute.
Listen, life got busy for both of us. So, you know what? We said off season, us too. So here we are. We're back in the new year, and we're just back like we never left.
At least that's the plan. Yeah, I think this episode really just going to be what silly season news that we have kind of today, what you may have missed in the off season, because there's been a lot, and I'm sure there's stuff that like has happened months ago that we forgot about that may have happened more recently that we haven't discussed. But it's off season, so just lots of new drivers and new places. And I guess we'll go ahead and tee up what's going to happen in the coming weeks as well, or leading into the season, because we are under 60 days till the season starts.
Yay! I'm so excited.
So with that, hopefully getting more people interested. If you're new to IndyCar, new to the world, we want to kind of be able to provide you with that information as we gear up to go into the 2025 season. So history of the sport, tech specs, all those details. What are the cars we're currently running? And then kind of go more in depth on kind of, who are the drivers on the grid and our completely and totally not biased opinions at all.
Listen, we try our best to be as unbiased as possible, but in the moments where we know that our bias shows up, at least we can recognize it and we let you know ahead of time. So you can't call us out for that.
We have never claimed to be a non-biased podcast, so it's fine.
That is also very true.
All right. You ready to jump into a lot that's happened since we last talked in October?
Yeah. Honestly, some of the stuff even I need like refreshers on. So this is going to be really good and useful information for all of us involved. So let's get right into it. So last episode that we talked about, it was right after Nashville, and we had covered the charter system in a bonus episode. So if you care to learn about any of that, we do have a specific episode about the charter system and about how teams are getting into IndyCar with the cars and all of that kind of stuff. So that's all there for your listening pleasure if you so choose. And since then, like we've mentioned, a lot has happened.
A lot has happened. I guess kind of going through our list and starting off, literally, I think it was days after we recorded the last episode, we got an announcement that both of our favorite drivers, Alexander Rossi, will still be driving an IndyCar. We, of course, knew that, exactly. We knew that he wasn't going to be with Arrow McLaren. It's been announced that Alexander Rossi is going to be driving for Ed Carpenter Racing in the number 20 car. And with that, Christian Rasmussen will be driving the 21 beside him. This did mean that Rinus VeeKay was out very suddenly. He's kind of more recently in the last couple weeks been in the Dutch media, went on, I think, a podcast talking about how that really came as a surprise. And I think it was translated to say that Rinus described it that Ed threw him out like bulky garbage.
Oh,
yeah.
That is a brutal quote. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I think it came as a surprise to a lot of us just because, Rinus is a very good driver. He is consistently pretty high up there. And you think about, his performance in the 500 last year, you think about his performances just in general, they're very consistent and very, very frequently I felt that he was out driving the car that he was given. And so it truly was very surprising that he is the one that is still currently out of a seat. So I love watching him drive, and I really do respect him a lot. I've never had an issue with him, anything that he has said and done. So I really do hope that we, eventually still see him on the grid. But like you mentioned, Rossi is one of our favorites. And so being able to see him get a car after, not being able to get a contract agreement with Arrow, it was very satisfying for both of us, at least.
100%. And just seeing what ECR is doing, and we know from the last 5 years of seeing Rinus, they always bring a good car to the 500. And I think that's something that Alex has already talked about, how he likes how it's a smaller team. There's a few of the guys that were at Andretti when he was there that are part of that ECR team. And with this too, and I think really what was kind of that big selling factor is the fact that they now have the man who I'm lovingly referring to as Splenda Man. I didn't write down his actual name, but the owner of Splenda and Java House Coffee has fully invested into ECR and, sponsoring this thing. And this is really the first time since probably, Target left being Scott Dixon's primary sponsor that we've had a brand that it's like, it's a tangible thing. You can walk into any store and be able to buy Splenda. You know that logo, you know what that means. So I think ECR is doing a really good thing here. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see, if you know that they always have a good 500 car, what they're going to be able to do now that they have that additional backing from Tim the Splenda Man.
Yeah. And you know what? I also have to give a massive shout out to the ECR socials team, because they are absolutely killing it with the content that they are putting out with Rossi and Christian. And I think it's so funny. And I think you had commented something absolutely ridiculous about getting Rossi into a Splenda costume, and they are entertaining it. So, or at least that's what they said.
ECR, if you're listening, I'm just going to tell you, if Rossi won't do the Splenda costume, I am so willing to do it. And I'm off in the summers. Gladly, we'll dress up in a Splenda costume.
That would be something I would pay money to see, not gonna lie.
It sounds like a great time. I want to do it.
But I do think it's such a different vibe from when Rossi was at McLaren with like the socials content. And like, don't get me wrong, I love McLaren's social team. I think they're fantastic at what they do. They really are one of the top teams for a reason for socials, if not like the top team. Like the content that they put out is just very high quality and very with it in terms of like internet trends. Sometimes teams or drivers or whatever hop on things a little late and don't really do it to the extent that it's meant to be done, whatever trend it may be. But it was always so interesting seeing Rossi in like McLaren social videos, because he was, I don't want to say typecast because that doesn't feel like the right word, but that's the word that's like coming to mind, of just like, yeah, we know he's like not, a golden retriever the way that Pato was. And he didn't like doing media duties all the time, but I felt like they kind of like dampered him a lot. And now like we're starting to see a lot more of his own personality shine through that we see on like off track, or, when you actually meet the guy, he's like the nicest person ever. And so I love that we're able to see this coming from ECR social. So shout out to the social team at Ed Carpenter. We love you. Keep doing what you're doing.
No, I think using the word typecast is honestly a good one, because they painted him as kind of this black cat, always grumpy guy, as opposed to like, I think what we see on off track, you see in person, like, is he the most outgoing guy in the paddock? Absolutely not. But like ECR really is just showing like he's just some guy. Like,
yeah, and I love that.
Exactly.
And you know what? This is just going to be a tangent. To anybody who talks about black cat personalities, I got beef with you, because we're not that bad, okay? You just have to catch us on the right day and in the right setting, and like also not be an so like we're not that hard. All of this to say, shout out to the Ed Carpenter social team. That's all I gotta say.
Moving on to, I guess, next bit of news. This has been well covered both by professional journalists, like in depth, and also there's plenty of think pieces and videos and stuff all over the internet. So we, for the sake of it, has been so long, are not going to spend the time deep diving into it. But we got to touch on the fact that Michael Andretti is no longer really truly part of Andretti, Autosport anymore. Dan Towers, who is the Gainbridge guy, so like the Gainbridge Honda that Colton drives, Dan Towers was able to take acquisition of the majority, if not all, of Michael Andretti's stock ownership in Andretti Global. Michael said that, a lot of it is that he's 62 years old, on top of Marco, Marissa, and Lucas, who are all grown. He also has like 10-year-old twins at home, and now like both his oldest just have had babies. He wants to be able to be around and be part of his family a little bit more than involved in the day-to-day operations. Is there stuff behind the scenes of all that? Yes, 100%. Did part of Michael Andretti being involved and then leaving be what got Cadillac Andretti into F1 for everything that we've heard? And no, yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Like the formalities of what Michael had put out, it's like, yeah, of course it makes sense. Like, he's getting older, he wants to spend more time with his family, blah, 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 blah. But like, you know that there's so much that's not being talked about. And like on our end and on everybody else's end who's completely removed from the situation, like we can only speculate, but you can't discredit the fact that Michael, like, he pulls himself out, and then all of a sudden, Cadillac and Andretti are starting to get like the green light about getting into F1, which I believe we have talked about in depth before in the podcast about, you know, Andretti and F1's whole beef with each other. But now that Michael is no longer there, and then all of a sudden F1 is starting to be like, yeah, sure, like come on in with Cadillac, or like starting to get that green light and that process rolling, you can't help but be like, well, what is actually going on? And is Michael actually the reason why Andretti never got into F1? Like, yes, we know this, but no one is ever actually going to say it. So again, all speculation.
I think another interesting thing, and again, this has been well covered and it's months ago at this point, so go find the stuff of people who covered it at the time better than we will now come January. But it was a very interesting kind of thing that came out of it, of seeing actual journalists such as Jenna who works for the AP, and Nathan Brown, who works for the Indy Star, who are like well-known like IndyCar journalists, talking about these stories, breaking and everything. And then you have Tony something. I'm not
Really
looking.
crushing it on the last names today.
I know, but it's excelling wonderfully here. It's fine. Tony, it starts with a D. He's on Twitter. If you're in IndyCar space, you know who he is. But he has a podcast, and like very clearly he has connections in the paddock and everything. And like I by no means am faulting like what he knows and what he's saying, but like it really came Tony and Jenna, and then like a lot of the other kind of like folks in that kind of general sphere kind of went head to head, like in this thing of like Tony being like, well, I broke the story first. Why didn't you give me credit? And then Jenna being like, well, I've been covering this for months, but like, unlike you with this podcast, I'm not going to just say, oh, I might know things, because I'm a proper journalist and I'm going to make sure I have my facts straight before like I start trying to run a man's career that he's been in for 40 years. Yeah, and it's one where it's like, like I think it's just interesting because it's, yeah, we're here, we have a podcast, but by no means are we going to sit here and like, or at least I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm a journalist in this sport. Not by any means. What I'm doing is reporting the news that other people have told me. Like,
Listen, if either of us ever at any point claim to be a journalist to break news on anything that happens, please someone find us and smack us upside the head, because we are not. We are not. We're just two people who are here. So that's so weird.
I don't know. I'm not saying that like he doesn't know people, he doesn't have that insider knowledge and everything, but there is a big difference between being a dude with a podcast and being someone who works for the Associated Press.
Yeah, massive difference. I mean, like, you know, not to discredit the information that comes from either, but like, yeah, professionally, they're wildly different levels. So, weird beef that has come from all of this. It is just truly not important.
No, and especially not at this point. It's well removed. I felt like it needs to be. We need to say our opinion on the matter. Of like, we are not here to do anything but share what I have read on the internet.
Correct.
So I guess off of that, another interesting thing that has really happened is Hy-Vee is no longer sponsoring cars. I think many people knew that Christian Lundgaard, when he raced for RRL last year, was sponsored by Hy-Vee as his title car sponsor. They were a lot of the backing for RRL. They also sponsor the Milwaukee Mile and both Iowa races. Last I heard, haven't fact checked this recently, but last I've heard, Hy-Vee is no longer sponsoring any cars. They pulled out on that front completely. And on top of that, they are not going to be sponsoring the Milwaukee Mile going forward. Still going to have the Iowa races. So like we're still going to see Hy-Vee in the sport, at least for the coming year. But yeah, I think that's just interesting. You have someone who's been kind of a title sponsor for the last few years, kind of pulling out, not completely, but getting pretty darn close.
Yeah, that's just really bad news for RLL, to be honest. Like, yeah, that sucks for them. But you know what? I have to say, Hy-Vee has done a very good job of being at the forefront with the Milwaukee Mile and like both of the Iowa races. They put on a very, very good weekend. I didn't realize that they pulled out of Milwaukee as well. I thought it was just the car. So, or if I knew that, I forgot. So, like I said before at the start of this, I need some refreshers here. So, this is good information. But I'm still looking forward to like what they do with the Iowa races because that is honestly one of my favorite weekends and favorite races. So, it's good that Hy-Vee is still there, but I am not anticipating them staying for much longer.
No. And I guess opposite end of talking about things that have been confirmed for the future with sponsors and kind of in line with the NTT being the title sponsor of the series, we have gotten confirmation that there will be a street race happening in the Arlington, kind of Dallas-Fort Worth metro area starting, I believe, in 2026. That's also been partnered up with all the major sports teams that are in that area. So, you know, you got the Cowboys, you got the Rangers. The Rangers really seem to be a lot of that, but not the only ones that are pretty bigly involved. So that's, I don't know. It was, people had very interesting opinions on that one. People were like, well, why are you going to go back to Texas but not go to the Speedway? Speedway is historically a bad race. In the like 12 races they were racing there, we had one really good one. The drivers don't like it. People weren't showing up. So it's like, look, if you can get Jerry Jones wanting to sponsor you, you say yes every time.
Yeah. 100%. And, you know, this also came not too long after all of the drama that went down between Pato and Mark Miles about that kind of stuff with the Mexico race. And there was just a lot of moving parts that was going on in terms of like topics of discussion. And I think that's why so many people had such mixed reactions. I am so stoked for this race. You have no idea. I want to go to it so badly. And I think it's going to be a fantastic one. I mean, like you have NTT that's based in Dallas. You have, like you said, all of the sports teams, the Cowboys, the Rangers. I want to say the Stars are also involved. But I don't know. I think Dallas is kind of a good place for them to go just because of how sports heavy it is. And like it's a major city, so you're gonna get people who are gonna go, but it'll be fun. I have high hopes.
And the renderings of the track came out with the announcement and everything. Like, it looks really cool.
It looks so cool. Oh my God.
Like, we'll know more as it gets closer. This is not something to worry about for 2025, but it's definitely like, it's a race, it's coming, it's one that we can confirm definitely on the schedule. I do hope it means it's an additional race and not that we're losing a track, but I guess
That
time
is
will
true.
tell with that.
I didn't even think of that. Dang.
Yeah.
That's a later time problem.
That's a later time problem. We can't worry about 2026 yet.
We are 4 days into 2025, okay? We need to worry about this season.
No. And we'll touch on drivers and everything where they're at. There's been a lot that has happened since we last talked as far as who's where and everything. So we'll get into all that one. Another news on kind of sad, we've lost another sponsor thing. And this one, you know, impacts me deeply is that AutoNation has pulled out as far as we are aware. I don't think there's been any official announcement, but everyone's been saying it for 3-4 months now, which could very likely mean we will not have any pink cars on the grid this year.
Devastating news for anybody who knows Megan. She loves
a
her
video podcast, but I have 3 number 27 cars sitting on my bookcase right now.
Listen, the pink cars are special, but if that is actually true, I guess we respect it. But, you know, my only request is that whatever the sponsor that replaces AutoNation is, keep the pink for Megan's sanity.
Because it's not just Kyle that's affected. Of course, like Kyle has the AutoNation Honda 27 pink car, but it's both the Meyer Shank cars are pink, and that's because of that AutoNation sponsorship. So, a little disappointing. As far as Andretti goes, they're going to be fine with sponsors. For Meyer Shank, I think that could be interesting to see who's going to be kind of there, other than kind of, I mean, yeah, they have the Sirius XM, but like other than that, who's going to be the main kind of sponsors of their cars? I don't know. They don't pay me to worry about that. I am perfectly fine with it. In November, we had big test at Thermal. Lots of kind of recognizable names. Enzo Fittipaldi was there, who is Pietro's little brother, F2 guy. Felipe Nasr, who I believe raced in IndyCar at some point and then kind of disappeared for a while. And then he's been in sports cars. Fairly big name in kind of the IMSA Le Mans sports car racing name. He ended up doing a test at Thermal. Our boy, Hunter McElroy. Hunter, again, you're welcome on the podcast at any time. Hunter was there. He had a really good test at Thermal. He ended up P1, I think, in all 4 sessions. And then Logan Sargent. is in the car for Shank Racing, which was very exciting. If you've listened to the podcast or you know me, you know, like I'm a big Logan Sargent fan, and especially after everything that happened at Williams, to see him genuinely seem very happy and talking about how comfortable he was in the Indy car. Like Shank did some great social stuff over that week, which good for them. They knew what was going to drive engagement. But also Mike Shank, who's apparently known Logan since like he was in karts, was saying a lot of good things. And it really kind of seems like whether it's their IMSA program, since MSR is getting into IMSA coming up this 2025 season, or whether it's eventually somewhere in IndyCar, if Mike Shank can have a say and the timing works out, there could potentially be a spot for Logan kind of in that realm.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting, like with Logan specifically, because like we've talked about this before, like last season a lot, because there were a lot of rumors that a handful of F1 drivers who weren't able to get seats or like were losing their seat or whatever, there was a lot of rumors about those drivers going from F1 and going into IndyCar being like, oh, well, it's, you know, it should be easy transition or whatever the case may be. Like it's easy to get a spot in IndyCar if you're an F1 driver. And it's like, actually, no, not really. I know I have made this monologue in the past before of like people in the F1 world think that IndyCar is like a step down from F1. And it is like, absolutely not. It is just different. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Logan and Meyershank with the social content that they gave us was that at one point they were asking him like, oh, how is the car feeling, and you know, the usual stuff, and he's like, it is so different, and like there is a learning curve, and it's not necessarily an easy one, but you know, I think the fact that he did so well in this testing is a pretty good testament to what he's able to do. And I've been saying it for a long time, and I think he would do very well in Indy, but timing wise, it's just not possible right now. So the fact that Mike Shank is like, yeah, sure, like we're keeping him in like the back of our mind, and who knows what the future might bring. So that's just my stint on it of just like, it's not the same as F1. It's different, and it's not necessarily an easy transition, but if you're a good driver, you're good, and it's going to be fine. You know, you'll get there.
Other news, baby Mac was born. Lucy
Oh my
McLaughlin
God, she's
is
so
in the world. She's so cute. She is not a tiny newborn. I think she was when this list was made, but now she's,
yeah.
4 or 5 months old and absolutely adorable. So congratulations to Scott and Carly on baby Mac joining all of us Earthside. I'm excited to, I'm sure, see her pop up at races in the coming year and everything.
The content we get is so sweet, and she is
Mhm.
literally his twin. He posted a baby picture of himself and her, and it's just like copy paste, but girl.
Like
And I
he
love
has
it.
tried to say that she looks like Carly, and it's like, No, Scott, she looks like you."
I love it. I do hope we get to see her in the paddock for some of the races, but I'm not anticipating that happening until like at least later in the season or something. And even if she doesn't make an appearance, that's fine. We respect it because having a baby in a paddock is a lot. So, you know what? We're just happy that she's here, she's healthy, Carly's healthy, we're all good.
Other bit of news that I've written down, then I have a few that are more recent to discuss before we get into driver stuff. I'll let you take it, but Pato at the Mexican GP with his first free practice of the 2024 season.
I'm sorry. Who? Who? I think the name rings a bell. I don't know. So I have talked at length about my beef with Mark Miles about this whole Pato situation. So if you want to hear me monologue about it, a couple episodes ago. But this was just such a satisfying weekend as a Pato fan. So Pato is the McLaren F1 team's reserve driver. And so if McLaren so chooses, he gets to drive in a couple free practices throughout the season. And as much as I give Zach Brown frequently, I have to give him a lot of respect for what he did for Pato in terms of his backing throughout the entire situation. Like he intentionally put Pato in for the Mexican free practice. which was amazing. And he's been doing that for a couple of years now. So it's nice to see that he's still continuing to do so. And I think because Zach knows how big of a deal this is to Pato himself, as to be able to drive an F1 car in his home country when he's been fighting and fighting and fighting to get an IndyCar race in Mexico. And so, like, driving Lando's car during the free practice was just so wonderful as a Pato fan, and he did really well. I'm pretty sure he ended up like P13 in the free practice session. And you know, what he did was give the McLaren F1 team a whole bunch of data in terms of like the setup of the car and all of that stuff, because at that point Lando is in like the championship fight with Max. And so he wasn't really able to push the car the way that we all know Pato wants to just go fast. Like, no thoughts, just go. Like, that's what he wants to do. And you know what? Valid as a race car driver, and valid as someone like Pato who has been trying to get into F1, and that's kind of been his goal. But he knows that that wasn't what he was meant to be doing at that time. It was just data, setups, and, you know, just making sure that he didn't crash the car. But what I really wanted to talk about is Pato had a meet and greet that was sponsored by KitKat. And it was at like a mall, and I don't know what him or his team was thinking, but they were like, oh, it's only going to be like a couple of hours, like, you know, it's in this public space, whatever. The place was so packed. It was insane. There was one photo that I remember like vividly, and I think it's the funniest thing. It's like a Renaissance painting from him where he's just in the middle, surrounded by security, and just swarmed with people from like a 3-story mall, and everyone is there for him. And he was there for like 4, 5, 6 hours trying to meet people, and he just couldn't get through everybody. And it was just kind of one of those, oh my God, if you don't know who he is at this point, like, what are you doing kind of deal. Like, he is, again, we have talked about bias, and this is where mine fully shines through. I'm sorry. But like, try to look me in my face and tell me that Pato is not the most well-known name in IndyCar. He is. He just is. And that kind of showcased that exactly. And I loved it because there were so many fans who had Pato merch that you could see during the race itself, like the F1 race. And I was like, that's so heartwarming to see. But then also, again, going back to giving Zach Brown some props, he wore a Pato Who hat the entire weekend. And I was like, that is fantastic.
Okay, I got some quick stuff run through, just kind of more recent things.
Okay.
So, Dreyer Reinbolt Racing is working on coming full time back into IndyCar. They've run in the 500. It's who Ryan Hunter-Reay, since he retires as a full time driver, it's like who Ryan Hunter-Reay has done the 500 with. It's who Connor Daly did the 500 with last year. They are trying to return to being a full time team. Of course, right now that means nothing. That does bring in a lot of questions on like what the is that going to mean? Because with the charter system, again, we have a whole episode discussing the charters and how that works. We're capped. And on top of that, we have multiple tracks, so we cannot fit more than 27 cars out. So I don't
But it
know.
means
I don't think
Jack Harvey at the 500.
does mean we get Jack Harvey at the 500. But yeah, so I don't know. It means nothing right now. I don't know if it's worth us spending the time delving on, but we still got other stuff to talk about. But that was interesting. Other thing, we got the top 10 IndyCar merchandise sales for the year just through the IndyCar like main shop. Based on that, I think it should come no shock. Pato Award is the #1 seller of merchandise for 2024.
What?
I know.
I never would have guessed.
The only man with its own merch. Second, Joseph Newgarden, which I think is fair. Third, this one I am pleasantly pleased but shocked by. Alexander Rossi.
No way.
Yeah, which maybe that's the tie from McLaren. You know, we talked about how they've marketed him better or made him maybe more inviting. Maybe it's just he's been in the series for a long time now. So I don't know. A lot of things, but I thought that was interesting. Quick run through: Scott Dixon in 4th, Roman Grosjean in 5th, Colton Herta in 6th, Alex Palou in 7th, Will Power in 8th, Scott McLaughlin in 9th, and Kyle Kirkwood to round out your top 10.
Interesting list, not gonna lie.
They all make sense minus number 5.
I was gonna say, but I didn't want to be too big of a about it, but here we are.
Look, Roman Grosjean doesn't have a seat currently. Change. He doesn't have a seat currently. Don't particularly look about him one way or the other. So if he wants to get offended by it, thank you for listening, Roman. I mean, come on the podcast anytime.
We're happy to change our tune. Yeah, we did meet him though at Barber, and he was very, very nice. So I will give him that. He stopped for everybody. So it's very, I guess I could see why. Like, he is coming from F1, like, obviously, like years ago, but he was a bigger name coming from F1 into Indy. So, like, I guess, but I digress.
Yeah, we got times. We still don't have our broadcast crew, so we don't know when James Hinchcliffe is employed yet, but we do have times for all the races for this upcoming year. Slightly disappointing, there are no night races, which is kind of sad. Like, it's fun seeing IndyCar at night.
I
So,
love night races.
like, the closest we have is Iowa Race 1's a 4 p.m. local time start, but 4 p.m. in the dead of summer, okay? It's still gonna be bright, so it doesn't really mean much. So, little disappointing on that front, but it's what it is. I am going to give so much credit for how much, though, Fox is already promoting IndyCar.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Like, we got, on NFL games, multiple like commercials and mentions for the Indy 500 months ahead of time. I don't watch Fox because they don't cover the SEC, but like I know that like Fox's college football broadcast has had Indy cars on the set like twice. Mark Ingram, who Alabama alum, so roll tide to Mark. They managed to fit that very large man into one of them small little Indy cars and like roll him onto the set. And like Mark was like, I'm going to a race now. That's fun. So already we are seeing the benefit of going to Fox and that like it's getting promoted in ways that we have not had previously and months ahead of time, not just days or weeks or no promotion at all.
Yeah. And I have to say this just as, like, I've been a fan for a few years now. I really have such a love-hate relationship with the fact that Fox is doing all of this promo because on one hand, obviously I want people to know IndyCar, like whenever I talk to people about what sports do I watch, because I'm a big like sports person, like I watch a lot of different types, but like my favorite is obviously watching IndyCar, and people don't really know it when I say it. And I'm like, oh, do you know like the Indy 500? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. I'm like, all right, so it's that series. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that they did more. And I'm like, okay, great. So like I want people to know, but at the same time, I want to gatekeep because I like being able to have a niche little community that we have. And so that's just a personal thing that I know a couple other people that like we're friends with and mutuals with are the same way. But obviously the need to grow and get better and bigger far outweighs our desire to be a niche little community. So, if you feel that way, you're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have discussed that way too many times, and it's just like, it's fun that it's small, and I don't want that part to change, but I want the series to exist, which means this backing and the support and it getting out there is huge, even if it just means 5 more people decide they're going to go to a race, or we're getting that NASCAR crossover that they're hoping happens and everything. Yeah. Okay, last bit of news. This literally was this morning. Yesterday, I think, when it dropped. I can't remember when I sent it to you. But McLaren Racing has fully bought out ownership of the IndyCar team. So Sam Schmidt and Rick Peterson, who previously owned it before Arrow acquired it in 2020, with that fully gone. So it is now completely in the hands of McLaren Racing and Zach Brown as far as what the IndyCar team is going to look like as Arrow McLaren in the future.
Yay. That's all I got to say on that. It's, it was such like a minimal amount or like a minimal percentage that McLaren didn't actually own. So it's just kind of like, all right, well, everyone knows them as McLaren. It's not like it was tied with anything else really for many, many years. And so it's just kind of like a formality at this point, So yay, McLaren. It's a phrase I never thought I'd say.
I think that's it news wise. I say it like that wasn't a lot. It was a lot. But also to discuss the grid at current, just a brief run through. As I mentioned kind of in the beginning, we are planning on doing really a deep dive. So if you are new to the sport and you're like, hey, who are these people? We'll be able to kind of provide you a completely and totally non-biased opinion base of, who are the teams, who are the drivers, who are they, what are their cars, all that stuff coming in a few weeks. But I guess for our own sake and for the people who have been listening with us through silly season, we have had a lot happen since we last kind of talked. So I'll go through the grid as we currently stand. AJ Foyt, of course, we know they retained Santino Ferrucci, and then David Malukas came over from McLaren to Mustang to be an AJ Foyt for the next year. We've known that for months now, so that's not really new news. Andretti's keeping their same three, so Colton Kyle and Marcus Ericsson. Again, no new news. McLaren, if you haven't been there for that saga, don't worry about it. Just accept these are the new drivers and you don't want to know. But Pato Award, of course, in the number 5. Nolan Siegel will be in the number 6. And then Christian Lungar left RRL to come to McLaren for the number 7. Again, not new news. We've known this since July, whenever Rossi the news on that one. So not new. McLaren has been pushing a lot of them on social and everything. It's a very interesting dynamic. So I guess if you're used to kind of their previous one, it's a race team. That's all I have to say on that one.
Listen, I'm keeping my mouth shut until we do a deep dive. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm just putting that out there. I do like this team.
We'll go in depth later.
There's a lot of feelings involved, though.
CGR Kiffin is in the number 8. So he went from the 4 to the 8. We talked about it for months, how this lineup we knew was going to be what happened. We just didn't know when or what or how because of the charter shifts, all that stuff. So Kiffin in the number 8, Scott Dixon, of course, in the number 9, and then Alex Palou will remain in the number 10. That is confirmed now. Not new news. Ed Carpenter Racing, we've already discussed to begin with. So just again, Alex Rossi and Chris Rasmussen are in that car. Myers Tank Racing, I believe we talked about this. I do think this happened before we kind of took our hiatus. But Felix Rosenquist remaining with the team. Marcus Ericsson is going from CGR into that second seat.
Marcus Armstrong.
That one. My bad.
Come on, dude. We talked about this. Oh, man. Okay, continue.
Felix Rosenquist and Marcus Armstrong are at Meyer Shank. Prema Racing, which, again, you can go back and listen to our conversations on Prema, but Prema will be a new team to the grid this upcoming year. They will be racing Callum Ilott, who, after a year hiatus, will be returning to IndyCar with Prema, and then Robert Schwartzman will be coming over. We'll discuss him and his backstory when we do our deep dive, but he will be filling that other seat. Penske's not changing. I don't see that changing until Will Power decides to retire, whenever Will Power's aliens decide to call him back home. I'm leaving it in, too.
Please keep that. I'm sorry. That really took me by surprise.
Team Penske will consist of Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin, and Will Power, so nothing changing on that front. Biggest news that we probably have are the next 2 teams as far as driver lineups when it comes to silly season, and ones we kind of knew were going to be like, okay, who are they putting in these seats? So first, RRL, of course, you have Graham Rahal. When your name's on the team, it's kind of hard not to be part of the team, so his daddy did not decide to fire him. But with that, they have Louis Foster coming from Indy Next, so he finished pretty high last season. I don't think he won. I think he came second, but was in the pretty high up in the championship with that. So Louis Foster is coming from Indy Next, which is nice to see someone actually graduating from the Indy Next program and getting promoted into seats. It's something, David, Kyle, Christian Rasmussen, we've seen guys in the past be able to work up those ranks. So it's nice to see a feeder system actually work out. Yes.
He was the champion from Indy Next. Just had to throw that in there. Shout out.
Didn't know anything about him until his name was announced. So
no, he was fantastic. He really was fantastic in Indy Next. So I'm very excited to see him coming in. And like you said, it's nice to see feeder series actually work, and specifically from Indy Next. I love to see it. So continue.
And then the last one is one of our more recent announcements with Devlin DeFrancesco coming back for that seat. Let's get that for now. We can discuss later my thoughts and opinions on this. Yeah. and DeFrancesco will round out our seats for next year. Then moving on to JHR, we have Stingray Rob back in a seat with love of Stingray Rob. Stingray, also welcome on the podcast anytime you want. Like, I don't think this is where I saw him landing, to be honest. I really thought he was going to end up at RRL. But yeah, he's at JHR in the 78 car, so good for Stingray. And alongside him, another one that makes me pretty happy, usually, Connor Daly. So Connor Daly, for the first time in a very long time since he was fired from Ed Carpenter Racing, will be racing full time in the IndyCar series. We'll go into Connor's journey, I guess, when we go our deep dive as well, but very excited for CD to actually have this seat. So that's everybody minus two. We are not kind of shocked that these two that are left are still there. This is Dale Coyne Racing. With that, as kind of usual, there's a lot of names floating around. If you're familiar with the series, you know this is the case. If you're not, I guess it's kind of known that at least the last few years, Dale Coyne very rarely has had consistent drivers. Jack Harvey raced the majority of last year. Catherine Legg did a lot of the ovals for them, but it was still one where like they were not in for every single race. We had a bunch of guys that did kind of one or two off races and then, didn't see them again. With that, and with the introduction of the charter system, we've gotten what's been nicknamed the Dale Coyne rule, where they at maximum can only run 3 drivers per car. With that, it's come out in the last week-ish that Dale Coyne is wanting to hopefully end up with full-time drivers in both cars for this upcoming year. However, if you're going off of like what Connor Daly was talking about, it's costing about $10 million minimum per car to run it. And so when you're a team that really Dale Coyne does not have a big title sponsor or anything. So you're asking your drivers to be able to front that money. It may be very hard to be able to find somebody to come up with all that money. With that said, the names that are being rumored that's possible for like full drives are Rinus VeeKay. We already talked about him, so he could be seen at DCR for a full season seat. And then Roman Grosjean. We really I think everyone expected Roman to end up at JHR, staying at JHR. And then he didn't. So rumors are it might be Rinus and Roman at their other names, Toby Sowery, Jacob Abel, who in the Indy Next series, Hunter McElroy, who did a couple of races for Dale Coyne last year, Linus Lundqvist, haven't seen a seat for him. So maybe he could pop up there. Either the Fittipaldi brothers, whether Pietro or Enzo. So a lot of names, nothing confirmed. To steal off Track's joke, it's going to be June when we find out who's racing in St. Pete.
And yeah, that's our rundown of where we're currently at with all the seats and the teams. And we're going to get into all of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions and just talk about each of the teams and the drivers at a later time. So if you are someone who cares about lore, that is going to be your bread and butter. So keep an eye out for that one later on.
All right. I think that's everything at current with the state of the off-season market. Drivers are on vacation. Media day should be coming up soon, but we're still a few weeks out from that.
Yeah.
Car launches beginning of February.
We're in the final stretch, y'all.
Yep. And then, as mentioned in the opener, we're going to be filling in some news, especially like whether you've been listening to us for a while, whether you've been following the series for a while and you just don't know a lot of everything behind it, and you're interested, or whether you're brand new to the sport and really want to know what does all this look like beforehand. Be on the lookout for those episodes before we preview St. Pete and get started in less than 60 days.
Woohoo! I'm so excited to be back. We're going to have a great season, y'all.
As always, socials, Racing Thoughts Podcast, Instagram, TikTok. Still don't have a Twitter. Maybe we'll make one of those eventually. Also be looking for a rebrand in that space as well, too.
Yeah, we're becoming legit in this upcoming season, okay? This is where we're at. So follow us on all our socials and be on the lookout for the next couple episodes.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.